In today's review, we're going to be taking an extremely detailed look at the recently released Transformers The Last Knight ThreeA premium scaled Bumblebee. Taking a look at some of the accessories that this collectible comes with, he honestly doesn't come with that much. The major and probably the best accessory that this figure comes with is of course the awesome Warhammer that we see Bumblebee obtain in the Last Knight movie. This was obviously seen throughout the entirety of the fight between him and Nemesis Prime, and I will definitely compare the ThreeA Bumblebee to the recently released and reviewed ThreeA The Last Knight Optimus Prime. As you can see, I think the details on this hammer are awesome, and it definitely does look spot on to what we see in the movie. They seem to have gone with this very kind of metallic, almost silver paint application for the majority of the hammer, which personally, at first I didn't think looked too good, as I initially believed the hammer was rather worn and rather a darker type of grey, as opposed to this shiny metallic paint. But nevertheless, it does definitely look extremely awesome and very realistic. I think some of the details in the actual hammer itself looks amazing. It really does look like it has just jumped out of the screen, and it's extremely accurate. As you can see, you've got all the yellow bits that break up the sculpt, making it look awesome. And the handle section too has been molded and detailed appropriately. As you can see, this side is more of a kind of cylindrical type of shape. And then on the other side, this tiny square plug here actually houses this tiny attachment. It is shaped to be plugged in a specific way and helps you to grip the hammer in Bumblebee's hand, as this is a fairly weighty piece. Despite not having any die-cast metal, it is solid plastic and it's quite a large piece, so it would definitely be extremely difficult to integrate into the figure's hands if it didn't come with that extra attachment. The next accessory he comes with is this piece here. This essentially hooks onto the back of the two door wings, and you can insert the hammer. It's just a way to store the hammer in robot mode, and I do believe it to be accurate, as we did see Bumblebee house the hammer on his back throughout some of the scenes in The Last Knight. And then the final accessory he comes with is of course his signature battle mask that we see him utilize in the Last Knight movie. As you can see, it is very stylistic. It does take some design cues from the Age of Extinction design, and I am glad that they went with the more Age of Extinction sleek look as opposed to the look that we saw in Dark of the Moon, as I really did like this battle mask and it looks awesome when put on the figure's face. As you can see, there are some nice details on it, some weathering marks on there, and it does definitely look like a bee or a wasp's type of face, so it's a really awesome battle mask. It does just plug onto Bumblebee's face, however I'll showcase that in just a bit. Now to begin with, I'm actually going to showcase the articulation. As this piece is so big, it is going to be quite difficult to showcase it in a way that fully showcases the whole figure, so I'll just work on section by section. The head section is on a ball joint, so it can look up and down as well as nod side to side. There are two joints, one at the head section and then one at the neck. This does allow you to have a great range of motion when displaying the figure and posing him around in various different poses, and it also helps you to get some expressions out of the figure. These antennae sections are on ball joints, so they can be pushed forwards and backwards, as well as swiveled and angled however you so choose. These collarbone sections are two on ball joints, so they can maneuver in a variety of different ways, which is great, as on the original version I believe they just swiveled forwards and backwards, which didn't allow for much posability and they did look rather off slightly. The arms have got a few joints. In order to really access the articulation, you're going to want to pull the shoulder pad down very gingerly on this ball joint section. As you can see, this section here can also move forwards and backwards to accommodate the articulation. Now, he doesn't actually have as much articulation in the arms as Optimus Prime. He is a fair amount smaller than Optimus, so I do imagine that is why. You do get a butterfly joint, which allows for about 2 clicks forwards and backwards. This just really helps to get him in some dynamic poses when displaying the figure with the hammer. The arms can rotate forwards and backwards also. Now, removing this section here, as it is just on a ball joint, as I do believe this piece is extremely delicate, you can actually ratchet these up. Now, they are extremely tight, and I have no idea why they've made the outward motion tighter than the motion to move them forwards and backwards, as surely the tightness should have been used for this joint, as that is really what holds the weight of the hammer. Nonetheless, I'm glad that they have utilised strong joints, but I do think their placement was rather misjudged. There is also a rotation joint right at the top of the arm, allowing you to swivel the figure's arm a full 360. The arms are actually triple jointed. So as you can see, there is a joint there, and a joint there. This allows you to get some great articulation. You can really bend the figure's arm all the way upwards like that, and you could probably do it even further if you so choose, but that is a great range of motion. This section here is on a hinge, so it can pivot forwards and backwards. It doesn't swivel side to side, unfortunately. However, I believe it is just designed to move out of the way when moving the hands, which are on a great ball joint as well as a hinge joint, allowing you a really great range of motion out of the hands. Each of the fingers are individually articulated. The thumb is on a ball joint, so it can swivel all the way around, as well as bend at the knuckle section. This finger here is able to hinge forwards and backwards at the base, as well as some articulation at the tip of the finger. Turning to the torso articulation, there is actually two joints. One that is situated about here, and then one which is situated about there. This double joint here allows you to get the figure in some great hunching poses. As you can see, the figure is quite a way hunched forwards, and you can also hunch him backwards that far as well. So there is a great range of motion out of the ab crunch on this particular release. These two ball joints allow you to rotate the figure around with a great degree, and as I stated, you can hunch him in near enough any position you so choose, which I think is fantastic. Turning the figure around to the doors now, as you can see, the doors are on hinge joints, so they can swivel forwards and backwards like so. There is a hinge here, however, it is relatively useless. You don't get much out of that whatsoever. And there is also a hinge here which allows you to hinge these sections out, as well as move these independently from the doors. However, as you can probably see, this is where I have one of my first quality control issues with ThreeA. The doors are actually wonky. They've misassembled this entire back section here, which does make them rather asymmetrical in their design. As you can see, this one definitely sits a lot lower than this one, and it's not a matter of fact of the way I have these positioned. It is actually the holes in the figure, which is such a shame. I have contacted ThreeA, so maybe they'll be able to help me out, but as of yet I have been unsuccessful in fixing this. I also have an issue with the head, which I will discuss later on in the review when I get to the electronic segment. Now, turning to the functionality of the legs, there is a great range of articulation in these as well. These 5 pieces are on ball joints, so they can swivel forwards and backwards, as well as be lowered down also on a separate hinge joint. This is great, as when you're moving the legs, you do definitely need to utilize moving these, as they would probably pop off if they weren't able to move. You can also ratchet the legs out and probably do the full split, moving that section out of the way. However, it does tend to bump into this back section here. The legs can kick forwards all the way. Also, they could probably do more, however, I don't want to force it. And they could also rotate back all the way as well. And they can really hold their weight, which is great. It definitely does show the strength of the ratchet joints. There is also a rotation just at that thigh section also. And the knees are also triple jointed. There is a joint here, here, and then here, which allows you to really bend this figure's knee all the way, just like so. As you can see, that is a great range of motion on the knees, and definitely helps you in getting him in some of those Iron Man landing poses and just crouching and doing general poses for the figure. The knee pads are also articulated. They are on hinge joints, so they do rotate forwards and backwards. I would have perhaps liked it if there was a joint here allowing you to shift this section up, as it does definitely become quite annoying. And finally, turning to the feet of the figure, this is definitely my least favourite part out of the whole articulation on this figure. I definitely think the previous version did it a lot better, and I'll explain why. In order to actually move the figure's toes forwards and backwards, you need to take this section here and shift it back. Now, I'm not entirely sure what on earth this achieves, as it doesn't really do anything, and usually it does tend to become stuck. As you can see, it does shift forwards and backwards, but I have no idea why. I do believe maybe it's to do with this section, but the feet are on a ball joint, so they can swivel side to side as well as forwards and backwards. However, you really do not get a great range of motion out of them in terms of the ankle rocker joint, which is such a shame, as on the previous version you were actually able to shift the whole foot around. On this particular release, you cannot swivel the toe at all, which I've definitely found wanting that articulation joint when posing this figure, and it is something that the previous version did, so I have no idea why they've left it out. But nevertheless, the joint that they have given us is this really pointless kind of toe hinge. It does pivot forward and backwards, but the rest of the foot doesn't shift, so I'm not entirely sure what that is designed to achieve, as I really haven't found it helpful at all when posing the figure. So overall, the articulation on this figure is exceptionally good, however, not as good as the Optimus Prime, but that is definitely to be expected. As I stated, this figure is quite a lot shorter than that Optimus Prime, and is priced at a lower price point than Optimus. Now, turning to the electronics on this figure, this is where I have one of my major issues with the figure. The head on mine actually has a fault in the sense that it cannot actually switch off. If you rotate the figure to the back, there is a small button here which you are meant to push in order to activate the lights on and off. But as you can see, when they're off, the lights on mine are still illuminated just like so. And when turning them on, they just go slightly brighter. This is such a shame, as every time I insert batteries into the figure, I have to consistently remove them in order to power the figure down, which becomes extremely annoying, as there is really hardly no clearance in the head in order to remove the batteries, so it is a right struggle. The head is also very temperamental. The lights do tend to glitch out now and again. As you can see, it is extremely frustrating that I cannot just leave them off and have to keep removing the batteries, which is definitely a shame, as with the lights on, it definitely does create a very realistic look. As you can see, the detailing in them eyes is just absolutely fantastic. I will address detailing more when I get into the detail section, But as you can see, the use of the LEDs really does bring this figure alive, and you definitely wouldn't be judged for mistaking this for an actual CG render of Bumblebee from the last night. It is a very nice feature, and I think it has been executed exceptionally well. However, I just wish that mine was repaired. And considering how much you pay for these figures, they really shouldn't come with any quality control issues. The second LED feature that this figure has is actually based on the front headlights of the chest section. In order to activate these, turning it around, there is a very well hidden switch here at the top, which when pushed will activate them. And as you can see, they are extremely bright, very vibrant LED lights, and they really do look fantastic, especially on display. I really do wish the head would work properly, as it would definitely look fantastic on display to have both the headlights and the lights in the head illuminated, and it would definitely make this figure look extremely realistic. I am also happy to report that I have no problems whatsoever with the LEDs in the chest, so it really does just seem that the only downfall for this figure is really in the LEDs in the head section and the wonky door wings on the back of the figure. Now, turning to some integration of some of the accessories, the first one I'm going to be talking about is of course Bumblebee's battle mask. As you can see, it does have a few grooves in there which literally do just slide onto the figure's face, just like so, and it does stay on there considerably well. As you can see, I can move the figure around and it's not loose whatsoever. I definitely think this integration of the mask is a significantly improved design technique as opposed to the Dark of the Moon one where you had to remove these two sections here and then plug the mask on. It was an extremely loose fitting job and was sometimes extremely frustrating. I definitely think the way that they've gone about doing this one looks a lot better, and as I stated, I really do like the battle mask look for this particular version of Bumblebee. Now, turning the figure around, I'm going to showcase how you can utilize this piece in order to store the hammer on his back. Now, as you can see here, there is a groove section. You're actually going to want to kind of clamp this around that groove section, push it in, and then rotate it around in order to really lock this piece in. It will not go in if you just try and snap it in. You're more than likely going to snap these sections. As you can see, there are two hook sections which literally just hook over the back of Bumblebee's door wings, just like so. And that is how you store the hammer in robot mode. And I think it definitely does look like a nice look. However, I do prefer having Bumblebee wield his hammer as opposed to having it stored on his back, as it does just seem to be this massive pole that sticks out from behind his head. And finally, I'm going to show how you can insert Bumblebee's hammer into the hand in order to obtain a very secure connection. In order to do this, you're going to take this section here and really and truly just plug it into Bumblebee's hand. Now, as you can see, the port on the hand is shaped in a specific way for this to go in. As you can see, it is shaped a specific way to actually plug into the figure's hand. So in order to do this, you just take it and literally clip it in just like so. This then allows you to take the hammer, and this slot here will literally peg into the port just like so. And that is how you securely acquire the hammer into Bumblebee's hand. Now, the fingers themselves don't actually do much other than make it look a lot more realistic. The support really does rely on those two pegs. And as you can see, unlike the Optimus Prime, which had the big black hinge protruding out for the sword, you really do not notice that this hammer is actually plugged on to the hand. Now, much like I did in the Optimus Prime review, I'm not going to be talking about every single aspect of the detailing on this figure, as it would definitely be an extremely long segment. Instead, I'm actually going to give you a showcased clip of showcasing the entirety of this figure's details in a way that I think will be both entertaining and informative to you. For a quick size comparison of this ThreeA The Last Night Bumblebee, here I have him next to the premium scaled ThreeA The Last Night Optimus Prime. Now I personally think that these two look great together. It is definitely great to have them in different poses next to each other when on the shelves, especially recreating that very cool Optimus versus Bumblebee fight, which was really the highlight of the Last Night movie. Of course, standing side by side to one another in a fairly static pose, they're of course not in scale with one another, as Bumblebee should definitely be a lot lower, more in the line of being around Optimus's waist section, as in the movie Bumblebee was considerably smaller than Optimus. However, these are premium scale collectibles and are not necessarily meant to scale with one another and are actually just supposed to look extremely awesome on their own. Personally, I'm not too fussed about the scale. I do think they look good together, and pairing them next to each other on the shelf, they definitely do have a fantastic and very grand shelf presence to them. Now for a quick comparison, here is the ThreeA Dark of the Moon version of Bumblebee compared next to the ThreeA version of the Last Night Bumblebee. Now upon first glance to just a casual collector, you really wouldn't notice any notable differences with these figures. It's not until you get very up close with them that you really do start to realise that the Last Night version of Bumblebee is completely different to the version that we got with the Dark of the Moon release. The only similarities that these figures tend to have is just elements in their design, which is of course not ThreeA's fault. Every single part of this figure is completely brand new, and if anything, it does build upon what this figure had. This figure is superior in a lot of the articulation elements, past some of the articulation in the feet, and I definitely do think that some of the detail, specifically in the head section, is vastly improved when compared to the rather chunky looking head that the Dark of the Moon version gave us. I really also like the paint job on the ThreeA Bumblebee from the Last Night. It definitely does look a lot more realistic to what a real life Camaro would look like, as opposed to this rather matte finish that the Dark of the Moon version gave us. As you can see, the Dark of the Moon version also has extremely clunky forearms, whereas the Last Night one definitely slims them down to look a lot more accurate to the movie. Personally, if you have the choice, I would probably go with the Last Night version, just due to how good it is in the articulation and detail, whereas the Dark of the Moon one really only specialises in being good in terms of detail. So there you have it. That is my review on the recently released Transformers The Last Night ThreeA Premium Scale Collectible Bumblebee. As I stated in the Optimus Prime review, this particular piece is only going to appeal to a very small demographic of collectors who are into the more high-end collectible figures. This figure doesn't transform, which isn't necessarily a shock, as I definitely don't think that they could have made this figure as accurate as it is and make it transform. It just isn't possible. So when people ask me, do these things transform, I really question on what they're actually watching and what they're looking at, as these pieces just could not transform. Even the CGI model in the movie cheats. There is really just no place for most of the parts that we see on these figures to actually go in a real life car. Nevertheless, talking about the figure itself, I think the detail on this figure is absolutely fantastic. It definitely looks like the Bumblebee that we see in the Last Night movie, and the articulation on this figure is a vast improvement over the previous Dark of the Moon version. Out of this Bumblebee and the Last Night Optimus Prime, Optimus is still definitely my favourite. I do think that the overall engineering and technicality of the Last Night Optimus beats this one. I really like how some of the joints on the Optimus popped out and pulled out in order for you to get a greater range of motion. I haven't really found myself having too much difficulties with posing this figure other than in the feet. I really do think the feet are a major design flaw of this figure, as they're just extremely basic in how they work. I really am quite annoyed about the fact that the LEDs in the head don't work. For a premium scaled figure which comes with an extremely hefty price tag, I do wish that the quality control on these figures were a lot better. I mean, I have collected all of the premium scale ThreeA figures and I've never had a quality control issue with them. Perhaps this is an isolated issue, but nevertheless, I really do hope that ThreeA can help me out in getting a replacement head. I'm also not particularly happy with the wonky door wings. Whilst it's not a massive deal breaker, this figure definitely should have come assembled completely correct and really shouldn't have any quality control issues whatsoever. I hope that you enjoyed this review. If you did, please let me know down in the comment section below. And until my next review, I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.